The wind slammed into the cabin like it meant to tear the roof clean off. Tobias Redmond didn't move. He sat by the fireplace, sharpening a blade with slow, steady strokes. One hand on the whetstone, the other on the handle. Each motion cut through the silence like a warning. The storm was coming hard. And that was fine. Storms kept people away. Then someone knocked. Not polite, not hesitant. 3 quick knocks, a pause, then one slow, heavy thud. Tobias froze. That rhythm, he knew it. 8 years ago, he'd heard the same pattern from a dying Apache boy he once tried to save. His eyes drifted to the door. No one had knocked since the night everything was taken from him, since men in uniform kicked it down, since his wife and daughter stopped breathing. He stood, slowly, blade still in hand. No one should be outside in weather like this, unless something worse was chasing them. Another knock. He walked to the window, peered through the wooden slats. Nothing but darkness, rain, and the kind of silence that comes before something breaks. But in his chest, something stirred. Not fear, not even anger, just a question. Why now? He glanced at the rifle above the mantel, the same rifle he hadn't touched in years. Outside, the storm screamed louder, but underneath it, he heard something else. Voices, women's voices, Apache, a language he hadn't heard since the day he stopped trusting the world. He didn't open the door, not yet, but something was coming, something that didn't care how long Tobias had been hiding, and when it arrived, he would have to choose. Pick up the rifle or answer the knock. The storm didn't ease. It roared louder, as if nature itself wanted to drown out what was coming. Tobias stepped back from the window, blade still in hand. His boots creaked on the wooden floor, old boards like old bones, tired and splintered. The wind howled through the gaps in the shutters. The fire crackled behind him. A single candle flickered on the table, its flame bending toward the door. Then came the knock again. 3 sharp raps, a pause, one long, low thud. Same rhythm. Not begging, not random. A signal. Tobias's jaw tightened. That pattern, it was older than the army, older than any war. He remembered hearing it once, long ago, from an elder Apache who said it was a call for sanctuary. A rhythm passed through generations. Outside, he heard voices now, soft, urgent, women's voices. One of them speaking Apache, another speaking English, with an accent like stone breaking on water. "Please," the voice said, "we know you're in there. We need shelter, just for tonight." Tobias closed his eyes. 8 years, 8 winters. No one had asked anything of him. No one had dared. He looked around the room. The same cabin where he'd buried his laughter. The same 4 walls that had kept the world out and the guilt in. And now, on a night like this, that world was knocking again. He stepped closer to the door. The iron latch was cold under his fingers. He didn't lift it, not yet. The voice came again, closer now. "You don't have to help us, but if you don't, we'll die out here." Tobias felt the weight of those words settle in his bones. Then, just before he could speak, he heard something else, a sound that pierced through storm and wood and memory. A baby, crying, weak, faint, but unmistakably real. Tobias lowered his head. This wasn't just survival. This was a test of who he was, of who he used to be. And outside his door, someone had just knocked with the weight of an entire world behind them. When Tobias finally unlatched the door, it didn't swing open. It resisted. 8 years of rust, 8 years of fear. The storm pushed from behind, like it too wanted to see. The door creaked, slow, heavy, and what stood on his porch would haunt him forever. 10 women, Apache, soaked to the bone, mud streaked across their faces, clothes torn, stained with blood, some fresh, some dry. One clutched a baby, wrapped tight in a bundle of fabric that had once been bright with color. Now it was rain-heavy, color faded. But tiny beads still clung to the edges, symbols, spirals, a language sewn in thread, a legacy trying not to drown. The youngest girl looked no older than 16. Her eyes held more silence than fear. The eldest, gray strands woven through black braids, stood like a mountain battered by time. But it was the woman in the middle who held Tobias's gaze. She stood straight, not proud, not broken, just unbending. A cut bled slowly above her eye. Her dress was ripped at the shoulder, exposing dark skin marked with paint. Once ceremonial, now smeared, now war-worn. Around her neck a cord of sinew, at the end a carved wolf's fang. Tobias blinked. He knew that shape. He had seen it before, long ago. Given to him by a dying Apache youth he tried to save. A debt Tobias had buried. Until now. The woman spoke. "I am Ayanna," she said. "These are my sisters, my daughters, my people. We've been running for 3 days." Tobias opened his mouth to speak, but his eyes locked on the baby, its lips pale, breath shallow, life barely hanging on. Some things are heavier than words. Some choices speak before you do. He stepped back. "Come in," he said. And just like that, the storm crossed his threshold, not as rain and wind, but as history, as memory, as something sacred, on the verge of being lost. They moved like shadows. One by one, the women stepped inside. No sound but dripping water, wet boots on wood, and the faint gasp of a dying fire. Ayanna was last. As she crossed the threshold, she paused, just long enough to meet Tobias's eyes. "The soldiers hunting us," she said quietly. "They're close. Maybe an hour, maybe less. They won't stop until we're dead." Tobias nodded. He didn't ask why, not yet. Instead, he closed the door behind her. The iron bar slid back into place. Too late now. The storm wasn't outside anymore. It had come in with them. He turned. 10 women, a baby, and something else. Not fear, not helplessness. Purpose, grief. A silence that spoke of fires and screams and nights like this one, too many to count. Tobias took a slow breath. His cabin had been his refuge. Now it was a battlefield. He just didn't know it yet. He looked again at Ayanna. Around her neck, the wolf fang still swayed. Then she said something in Apache, just one word. Tobias didn't know the full meaning, but he recognized it. It was the word the dying boy had whispered years ago, the one Tobias never forgot. It meant, remember. He did. And as the wind howled outside, Tobias Redmond understood. He hadn't opened the door for them. He'd opened it for himself. The cabin had never felt small before, but now, with 10 silent strangers inside, it shrank. Tobias shut the door against the wind, and for a long moment no one spoke. The only sounds were the crackling fire, the drip of melting snow from cloaks, and the quiet, uneasy breathing of those who had fled through hell to get here. Ayanna knelt near the hearth. She unwrapped the child from her chest. The baby, barely breathing, was swaddled in a handmade sling. Beads, feathers, a pattern worn with age and meaning. Tobias had seen that design before, long ago, on the clothes of the dead. A woman, older, eyes like thunderclouds, began unpacking bundles from beneath a robe. Dried leaves,
pouches of powder, bits of bark and root. The scent of wild sage and crushed pine filled the air. Another woman lit a small stone bowl with a coal from the hearth. Smoke curled upward in tight spirals. They didn't ask, they didn't explain. They changed the room just by being there. Tobias could feel it. The very walls seemed to hold their breath. Words in Apache whispered across the space. He didn't understand the language, but he recognized the rhythm. It wasn't conversation. It was prayer. One of the younger girls sat cross-legged in the corner.
She opened a bundle wrapped in hide, carefully, like it was a newborn. Inside was a long, weathered scroll made of animal skin, painted with strange symbols. She traced them with her finger, eyes closed, mouthing something soundless. Not just survivors, Tobias thought, carriers. They brought more than fear. They brought a whole world. He walked to the window. Frost clung to the glass. Beyond it, snow fell in sheets. The plains were gone, erased in white. He turned back to the room. Ayanna looked up at him. "Tobias," she said. He flinched. How did she know his name? But she just nodded, like she'd always known. She dipped her fingers in the smoke bowl and pressed a small mark onto the baby's forehead. A spiral, a sun, a symbol Tobias didn't know, but felt. Then she looked at him again. "They'll come," she said. He didn't ask who. He already knew. And as the fire flickered low, Tobias realized this wasn't just a cabin anymore. It was a border between one world and another. The cabin had grown quiet. Only the crackle of fire remained. Tobias sat by the hearth, his rifle still near, though his grip had loosened. Ayanna stood by the window, her face dimly lit by lightning flashes. Then, without turning around, she stalked, her voice calm, but carved with pain. "They didn't come for us because we broke a law. They came because we remembered who we are." Tobias glanced over, brow furrowed. Ayanna turned slowly, eyes locked on his. "There's a canyon," she said, "far to the south. They call it nothing. To us, it is the cradle of memory, a sacred place. Our stories were born there. Our songs echo from its stone walls." She stepped closer. "Captain Morrison brought fire to that canyon. Fire and guns and men who laughed as they burned the bones of our elders. Not soldiers, executioners." Tobias looked away. Ayanna's voice hardened. "They came at night, during the moon of renewal. It was meant to be a time of healing, of planting prayers into the soil. Instead, we woke to the screams of our storytellers, our midwives, our wisdom keepers." Her hands clenched. "They didn't just kill people, they tried to erase us. They shot our sacred drums. They shattered carved stones passed down from ancestors. They poured whiskey into the ashes of our ceremonies." Silence fell again. Then Ayanna whispered, almost to herself, "Memory is dangerous to those who build their empires on lies." Tobias said nothing, but something inside him shifted. This wasn't a skirmish. It was erasure, planned, funded, and executed with precision. Ayanna finally sat, exhausted. "We ran," she said, "but we didn't just run for our lives. We ran for the songs, for the names, for the stories not yet told." Tobias leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why would a man like Morrison do all that?" Ayanna looked at him for a long time. Then she reached into her cloak and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. She handed it to him. "Because of this." Tobias opened it. It was a crude map, hand-drawn in black ink, showing lands with markings in military code. But one word kept repeating in red: gold. Ayana spoke softly, her voice bitter. The cradle lies above veins of it. So do 3 other sacred sites. Morrison isn't just a soldier, he's a broker. He clears the land, and his friends come in with picks and claims. Tobias stared at the map. This is organized. It's sanctioned, she replied. Higher than Morrison. Men in Washington who will never hold a rifle, but give orders just the same. The fire popped. Outside, wind howled against the walls. Ayana's voice dropped. They tried to kill more than our bodies. They tried to kill our memory, our place, our meaning. The ones who carried prophecy were burned first. Tobias closed the map slowly. His hands trembled. Ayana nodded. That's why we ran, not just to survive, but to protect the last of it, the words, the breath of the ancestors.
Then Ayana looked straight into his eyes. We are not just women with a baby. We are the last page of a book someone is trying to burn. Tobias said nothing, but in that moment something hardened in his chest. Not anger, not yet. Conviction. The kind a man finds when he knows there's no one else coming. That night, as the wind settled into a low, steady moan, Tobias sat with Ayana near the hearth. The others had fallen into silence. Only the quiet rustle of firewood breaking echoed in the room. Ayana unwrapped a bundle from beneath her cloak, careful, slow, as if handling something alive. Inside was a scroll made of aged buffalo hide. The leather was cracked but strong, and etched with strange symbols, spirals, animals, stars, and shapes Tobias couldn't name. This, Ayana said, is our last thread. She laid it gently across the table, smoothing the edges. Tobias leaned closer. The markings weren't just drawings. They carried rhythm, like a song written in shape and spirit. It tells of our beginning, she continued, of the first fire, the mountain that bled water, and the agreement between the sky and the people. Tobias stared. A history? A prophecy? A map? A prayer, she answered. This scroll contains stories that were never spoken in English, stories only passed from the elder to the next voice. Ayana pointed to a symbol, a wolf howling under a broken moon. This one, she whispered? It says a time will come when the wolf runs alone and the stars fall silent. Tobias frowned. That's happening now. Ayana nodded. And yet, she said, the wolf is not meant to die. He is meant to awaken the sleeping fire. Her eyes met his. The silence deepened. From a corner, the eldest woman, silver-haired and silent all evening, stood and approached. She held a small pouch made from deerskin, tied with sinew. Without a word, she opened it and poured the contents into her palm. Seeds, tiny, dark, and gleaming.
These, Ayana said softly, are from our ancestors' gardens, grown before the first white boot touched our land. They carry what we were and what we can become again. Tobias swallowed. For the first time, he realized they weren't running with burdens. They were carrying something holy. Tobias leaned back, letting the truth settle in. The scroll, the seeds, they weren't just relics. They were resistance. Ayana reached into her cloak once more and pulled out a second object, wrapped in layers of soft hide. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a flute, not made of wood or metal. It was bone, polished smooth, etched with the same symbols as the scroll. Tobias stared at it. Something about the instrument made the air in the room shift. The flame of the fire flickered sideways, though there was no wind. Ayana held the flute like one holds a memory. "This is the breath keeper," she said. Her voice grew softer, reverent. "It has called storms, carried the names of the dead, And once it summoned an eagle that would not land until a child was born. She smiled faintly. My grandmother said its sound wakes the ancestors, not just in the spirit world, but in the hearts of the living. She placed it gently beside the scroll. These are not weapons, she said, but they are what Morrison fears most, because they are proof. Tobias raised an eyebrow. Proof? Ayanna nodded. That we were here. That we had names, songs, laws, before any flag was planted in this soil. She looked down at the seeds. If he destroys this, no one will remember. No one will believe. Tobias stood slowly. The room seemed smaller now, but not from fear, from the weight of what it held. He turned to Ayanna. You said this scroll is a map, he said. To where? Ayanna stepped forward. To where we rise again, she answered. And in that moment, Tobias understood. They weren't just trying to survive. They were trying to resurrect a nation. The storm outside had faded into a distant hush.
Inside the stone cabin, a different kind of electricity hummed. Tobias sat near the fire, eyes moving from face to face. These weren't just survivors, they were something more. Ayanna was sharpening a blade near the hearth, her movements steady, silent. But Tobias noticed the way she paused, then adjusted, reacting to shifts in the wind outside. You hear something? He asked. She nodded without looking up. The birds stopped singing 10 minutes ago. The coyotes farther west have gone quiet too. That means riders are within a mile. Tobias blinked. How the hell do you know that? She gave him a look, half amused, half serious. Because the land talks louder than people. She pointed toward the doorway. And because the last time the wind blew like this, they burned my village. Tobias fell quiet. Then he noticed the elder woman, small, wrinkled, wrapped in dark wool. She was sitting cross-legged, facing the wall. Not speaking, not blinking, just listening. What's she doing? Ayanna answered softly, listening to the ground. Tobias raised an eyebrow. She's a tracker? No, Ayanna said. She's a whisperer. He stared. She says if you sit long enough, the earth will speak, and when it does, it doesn't lie. Outside, the wind shifted again. The elder turned her head slightly. A single word escaped her lips. A direction. Ayanna nodded, as if confirming a strategy. Tobias had never seen anything like it. He wasn't in charge here. He wasn't even the smartest man in the room. He was surrounded by warriors, each one carrying a piece of something ancient, something powerful. And the longer he watched, the more he realized. These women weren't waiting to be saved. They were preparing for war. In the far corner of the room, a girl no older than 16 was kneeling beside a rolled hide. She wasn't speaking, just moving her lips, silently mouthing words Tobias couldn't understand. What's she doing? He asked. Ayanna smiled faintly. She's reciting the stories, every line. Every symbol on that hide. It's all up here. She tapped her temple. She's what we call a keeper, a living memory of our people. The girl looked up and met Tobias's eyes. There was no fear in her gaze, only calm determination, like someone born under pressure and shaped by purpose. Tobias nodded to her, almost out of respect. Then his attention turned to a young woman rocking a bundled baby in her arms. She moved gently, rhythmically, humming something that wasn't quite a lullaby. There was something different about her. Her hands. They glowed with a faint warmth as she touched a wound on another woman's shoulder. Not magic, not exactly, but steady, skilled. She's a healer, Ayanna explained, not just with herbs and bandages. Her grandmother taught her how to channel pain away. The woman looked up at Tobias and offered a tired smile. I can stop bleeding. I can ease fever.
but I can't fix a broken world." "No," Tobias said, quietly, "but it helps." Just then the fire crackled, and Ayanna rose to her feet. She took in the room. Each woman moved with silent efficiency. No panic, no confusion. They knew their roles. They had trained for this, not just to survive, but to carry forward a legacy, a culture, a language, a soul. Tobias stood slowly. He looked at the tools, the weapons, the quiet grace of these warriors. He wasn't among victims. He was among legends in the making. And for the first time in 8 long years, he wanted to fight for something again. The morning broke with a brittle silence. Tobias stepped outside, coffee in hand, but the birds were gone. The wind carried no scent of dew, only dust and dread. He scanned the horizon. Then he heard it, a faint rhythmic pulse. Hooves, many of them, distant at first, but growing. He lowered the tin cup slowly, eyes narrowing. Inside the stone house, Ayanna froze mid-step. She tilted her head, closed her eyes, and whispered a word Tobias didn't understand.
Then she said, "They're here." Tobias didn't ask how she knew. He felt it now too, in the earth beneath his boots. He walked to the rifle hanging by the doorway. He hadn't touched it in years. As his fingers wrapped around the wood, memories surged, the screams, the fire, the graves. His hand trembled. Ayanna approached him calmly, her voice low. "You should go. There's still time." He looked at her. "And what will they do to you if I run?" Her silence said it all. He looked past her, to the girl holding the baby, to the old woman tracing lines in ash, to the youngest one clutching the sacred hide. Not warriors now, just people. Tired, sacred. Then came the voice, faint but cruel. "Redmont, this is Captain Morrison. We know what you're hiding." Tobias's jaw clenched. Ayanna reached into her pouch and handed him a small stone, etched with a spiral symbol. "If you stay, this marks you as kin, not by blood, by choice." He took it. The sound of hooves came closer. And Tobias Redmont made a choice, for the first time in 8 years. Tobias closed the door gently, locking it with a calmness that felt foreign. The room was still. Only the fire crackled, as if unsure whether to roar or retreat. He walked to the center, holding the stone Ayanna had given him. All eyes turned to him. He looked at each of them, not as strangers, not as burdens, but as people he'd chosen to protect. "My name," he said slowly, "is Tobias Redmont. And this land may not be much, but it's mine. And if they want to spill blood today, they'll have to step over my threshold." Ayanna didn't smile, but her nod carried the weight of 1,000 ancestors. Outside, Morrison's voice returned, louder, closer. "You've got one chance, Redmont. Hand them over, or we'll burn that place down with you in it." Tobias picked up a shovel near the fireplace. "He means it." "We know," Ayanna replied. He motioned toward the back of the house. "There's an old root cellar."
"Won't stop fire, but it might buy time." Ayanna shook her head. "If they find us hiding, you'll die with us." "Then we don't hide," he said. "We fight." Ayanna placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not out of revenge?" "No," Tobias said, "not anymore. I buried my hate with my family. This is about stopping monsters from doing it again." The women began preparing, quiet movements, focused eyes. Even the child carrying the sacred hide now stood straighter, her fear replaced by resolve. Tobias snapped on his revolver. The air outside turned heavy. Captain Morrison shouted one last time, But inside that house, the line had already been drawn. Outside, the wind howled like an ancient spirit. Inside the cabin, something even older began to awaken. Tobias sat by the window, cradling his rifle, his knuckles white. He expected panic, people crying, whispering prayers. Instead, the room was silent, but not afraid. Ayanna stepped into the center, her back straight, her eyes locked forward. She opened a leather pouch and pulled out strips of cloth, small pots of red clay, and a few pieces of charcoal. Without a word, she dipped her fingers in the clay and drew symbols across her face, bold lines down the cheeks, spirals over the brow, a mark over the heart. One by one, the others followed. The young girl with the sacred hide removed her outer wrap, revealing a bow across her back and a quiver of arrows bound in rope. The healer unwrapped a belt of sharpened bone tools. Even the old woman, slow and wrinkled, pulled a stone-headed war club from beneath her blankets. Tobias stared, stunned. These weren't victims. These weren't women begging for mercy. These were warriors. Ayanna approached him. Her voice was low, even, like a drumbeat. "You thought we were fleeing," she said, "but we were only searching for a place to make our stand." She handed him a strip of cloth and a small blade. Tobias hesitated. Then he saw them, each woman focused, deliberate, no trembling hands.
No wasted movements. They moved like people with a purpose far greater than survival. The elder began to hum, a chant, soft and haunting. The walls of the cabin seemed to pulse with it. It wasn't a battle cry. It was a call to memory, a call to ancestors. Ayanna touched Tobias's chest with her clay-covered fingers. "You let us in," she said. "Now you stand with us." And Tobias, loner, widower, ghost, nodded. He tied the cloth around his arm. He stood among warriors now. The cabin no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a war lodge. Each woman moved with silent purpose. They covered windows with blankets to control light. One woman smeared ash on the floor to mask tracks. Another reinforced the door with an old plank wedged under Tobias's table. Ayanna passed out handmade weapons, short spears, stone knives, a sling wrapped in braided horsehair. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Tobias watched the youngest girl, the keeper of the hide, tie her hair back and string her bow. Her hands moved fast, practiced. He realized she'd done this before. Then came the transformation. Ayanna knelt beside the fire. With a slow breath, she reached into a leather pouch and pulled out a small bird skull. She held it in both hands, eyes closed, lips whispering words Tobias didn't understand. One by one, the others joined her. A quiet chant rose, layered and low, like wind moving through bones. Tobias felt the hair on his arms rise. He wasn't just witnessing warriors prepare. He was watching something ancient awaken, a ritual, a remembrance. When they rose, their faces were marked with sacred paint, their weapons ready, and their eyes full of something Tobias hadn't seen in years: clarity. They weren't here for revenge. They were here to protect something sacred. Ayanna approached him one last time. She pressed the bird skull into his hand. "This is for courage," she said. "It's not given, it's remembered." Then came the final moment. Outside, a horn blew. Morrison's signal. Inside, Tobias looked around. The cabin he'd once built for solitude was now a fortress of purpose. He cocked his rifle. They were ready. And when the enemy came, he would not face women and children. He would face the spirit of a people who refused to vanish. The sun had barely risen when Tobias spotted the first glint of steel on the ridge. They were coming.
He stood alone on the porch, rifle in hand, eyes sharp. The cabin behind him was silent, sealed like a tomb. Ayanna and the others had vanished into the land, melted into the brush and shadows, just as planned. Morrison rode at the front, 30 men behind him, armed and cocky. His boots gleamed, his mustache stiff. He looked like a man sure of victory. Tobias knew better. He stepped forward. "Redmond?" Morrison called out, reining in. "I figured you'd gone soft, taken in strays." Tobias didn't answer. He didn't blink. Morrison smiled, dismounted, and walked closer, one slow step at a time. "I'll make it easy. Hand over the savages, and we pretend this never happened." Still nothing. Then Tobias said, "You already made your choice. So did I." That's when it began. A flash of sunlight reflected from the ridge, a mirror tilted just right. It was Ayanna's signal. From the tree line behind Morrison's men, a blur of motion. The Apache women struck like shadows. A blade to the throat, an arrow to the back. One soldier collapsed before he even knew he'd been touched. Chaos erupted. Morrison turned, shouting orders, but his men were falling fast, one by one. The silence of it was terrifying. No war cries, no gunshots, just the sound of bodies hitting dirt and hooves skidding in panic. Ayanna emerged from the brush, daggers in both hands. She didn't rush. She walked toward Morrison like death in motion. Tobias raised his rifle, but not at her. He aimed past her. A soldier had drawn on her blind side. One shot. The man dropped. Ayanna didn't flinch. She looked at Tobias. Just a glance. But it said everything. They were no longer strangers. They were allies. Morrison staggered back, fury etched deep into his face. "Kill them all!" he roared. But it was too late. His formation had crumbled. The horses were panicking, trampling one another. Men shouted in confusion, trying to find targets they couldn't see. The Apache women moved like smoke, silent, precise, vanishing before gun barrels could turn. Tobias dropped to a knee, reloading. Ayanna launched forward. She slid beneath a swinging saber, jammed her blade upward into a soldier's ribs, and rolled to her feet in one motion. The man gasped once, then nothing. Another tried to grab her from behind. She flipped him over her shoulder, crushed his windpipe with a heel. This wasn't vengeance. It was justice, swift and ancient. Morrison's voice cracked as he called for his lieutenants. None answered. His men were either dead, wounded, or scattering into the hills. Tobias rose again and marched toward him. "Still think this is about savages?" he growled. Morrison raised his pistol, trembling. But before he could fire, a blur dropped from the cabin roof. One of the youngest Apache women, barely more than a girl, had climbed up hours earlier. She landed hard on Morrison's back, drove a carved obsidian shard into his shoulder, and screamed a single word in her language. A word that sounded like thunder cracking open the sky. Morrison fell to his knees, gun spinning from his hand. Ayanna approached, her face unreadable. Tobias stood beside her. Morrison looked up at them both, bloodied and beaten. You think this ends with me?" "No," Ayanna said softly. "You were never the end. Just another mouth full of lies." She turned away. Tobias looked down at Morrison. The land remembers. Behind them, smoke still rose from the ridgeline. But inside the chaos, a quiet truth had formed. This was no longer just a battle for survival. It was the start of something bigger. The battle had ended, but Tobias didn't feel victorious. He stood among the wreckage, bodies strewn across the dirt, weapons dropped mid-flight, the scent of sweat, smoke, and blood thick in the air. Ayanna moved silently, checking the fallen. Some soldiers groaned, clinging to life. Others lay still. Then came the sound. A cry, high-pitched, human. Tobias turned fast.
It wasn't from the Apache women. This wasn't one of their children. It was from the barn. He rushed toward it, rifle at the ready, heart pounding harder with every step. He kicked the door open. The cry grew louder, raw, desperate. In the shadows, swaddled in torn cloth, was a baby. Alone, dirty, crying until its lungs gave out. For a moment, Tobias just stared, and then something inside him cracked. The barn dissolved, the sounds faded. He saw fire, heard screams, his wife, his daughter, their final night. He blinked hard, but the cry remained, real, present. He knelt, trembling, and gently lifted the child. The baby's skin was cold, its face red from screaming. A girl, just like his had been. Behind him, Ayanna appeared at the barn door. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Tobias was holding more than just a child. He was holding the edge of a choice he couldn't unmake. Tobias stood there, frozen, with the baby girl pressed against his chest. Ayanna stepped closer. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "She's not one of ours." Tobias nodded slowly. "I know." Then why was she here? He shook his head. Bait, insurance, or maybe just a casualty they forgot. The baby's cry softened, as if sensing safety. Tobias rocked gently, his calloused hands awkward but careful. The weight of her was unbearable, because it was familiar. "I had a daughter," he said, his voice cracking. "Before all this, before the war, before I stopped feeling." Ayanna looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You don't have to explain." He did anyway. "I was going to blow the dam," he whispered, "when Morrison crossed the stream. That was the plan." Ayanna's eyes narrowed.
"There are charges set along the rocks, enough to flood the basin and sweep them all away." A long silence fell between them. "You can still do it," she said carefully. Tobias looked down at the child. "No," he said. "If I do that, she dies too." His voice broke. "And I'm no better than them." Outside, the wind shifted. The air was still. The battle was over, but the war inside him had just begun. For Tobias Redmont, the point of no return wasn't the fight. It was the moment he chose mercy. And mercy, sometimes, changes everything. The fire crackled low in the center of the cabin. Tobias sat near it, baby girl asleep against his chest, wrapped in a warm hide. Around him, the women gathered, silent, exhausted, but alive. Ash still clung to their clothes, blood on their sleeves. Ayanna crouched near the fire, her eyes locked on the flames. "We can't hold this place," she said, "not with more soldiers coming." "They'll be here by morning," Tobias replied, "and they won't make the same mistake twice." The air grew tense. He looked around, at the eyes watching him. These weren't trained warriors. These were mothers, daughters, survivors, and yet they had won. Ayanna studied him. "What would you do if it were just you?" "I'd disappear into the hills," Tobias said. "Lay low, pick 'em off one by one." "But it's not just you anymore." He nodded. "No, it's not." He stood, moving to the table. He grabbed a piece of charcoal and sketched fast on the wood. His land, the river bend, the narrow gulch near the oak ridge. "This is where we fight," he said. Ayanna came closer, her eyes narrowed. "A trap?" "A choke point," he corrected. "One way in, steep walls. If we lead them there, they'll have no cover. We can hit them from above." Ayanna stared at the map, then at Tobias. "And you think we can win?" He didn't smile, just said, "We already did once." Ayanna looked at the map again, then glanced at the others. "We'll need decoys," she said.
They'll expect an ambush.
Tobias nodded. We let them expect it. He pointed to the south slope. I'll lead a false trail down here, drag brush behind my horse, leave boot prints, light a false campfire. Let 'em think I'm running. Ayanna added, while we hide the others up here. Her fingers traced the high ridge above the gulch. Camouflage, stillness, strike only when the first shot is fired. Tobias met her eyes. We blend what we know, your silence, my traps. Ayanna gave a small nod. 2 worlds. He looked around the room again. I'll need volunteers, people who can climb, people who can move without sound. I'll show them where to lay the snares, how to trigger the deadfalls. One of the older women stepped forward. I'll climb. These bones aren't done fightin' yet. A younger girl followed. I can move faster than any man. Tobias felt something stir inside him, something that had been dead for years. Hope. They weren't soldiers, but they had something better. Purpose. Ayanna placed a hand on his shoulder. Whatever happens tomorrow. I know, Tobias said. We don't get a second chance. Outside, the stars blinked awake. Somewhere in the dark, hooves were already thundering. But inside, a different kind of power was rising, born of grief, sharpened by courage, and now, finally, aimed with purpose. Tomorrow, the land would choose. The first rays of dawn barely touched the treetops when Tobias snipped away from the ridge. He moved like a shadow, weaving between pines and rock, his Winchester strapped to his back, his breath steady. The cries had returned, soft now, muffled, but real. A child, somewhere deep in the ravine. He followed the sound, cutting through a patch of burned grass, until he saw it. A makeshift tent, crudely built, hidden beneath hanging brush. He raised his rifle, crept closer. Inside, a woman knelt beside a small child. She was humming, barely audible, her back turned to him. The child stirred, wrapped in a blue blanket.
Tobias took a breath. Don't move. The woman gasped and turned. She wasn't armed. Young, barely 20. Her eyes wide with terror. My name is Mary, she said quickly. Please, he said I'd be safe here. Tobias didn't lower his gun. Who told you that? She swallowed. Captain Morrison. That name hit like a hammer. He said I'd be cooking for the officers, said I'd be paid, and they'd help care for my son. Her voice cracked. I didn't know what they were doing to your people, I swear. The child began to cry. Tobias's gaze softened, just for a second. You've got 30 seconds, he said. Grab what you need. You're coming with me. Mary nodded quickly, gathering a few belongings. As they moved through the trees, she whispered, Are they going to kill us? Tobias shook his head. Not if I can help it. And in that moment, he realized something strange. Mercy wasn't just what he gave. It was what he was beginning to need. The sun had barely risen when the earth began to tremble. 60 riders crested the eastern ridge, uniforms gleaming beneath the morning light. Flags of the U.S. cavalry snapped in the wind. At the front rode a tall man in a black duster, Colonel Nathaniel Bradley. He didn't shout orders. He didn't need to. His presence alone silenced the clatter of hooves. Below, nestled in the basin, Whisper Rock Ranch stood still. Too still. No smoke from the chimney. No horses in the corral. No sign of life. Bradley raised a hand, signaling halt. Morrison, he asked, scanning the scene. No answer. Beside him, a scout whispered, Something's wrong. Should have heard gunfire by now. Bradley's jaw clenched. He motioned 2 riders to fan out. But before they moved, a single voice echoed from the trees. We have your son. It was Ayanna. She stepped into view, her face painted in deep crimson lines, the symbol of her tribe shining proudly on her forehead. Behind her, Lieutenant Bradley stood, hands bound, eyes filled with shame. Colonel Bradley froze. "My son," he muttered. Ayanna raised a hand. "He's alive, but he's seen what you tried to bury." The cavalry stirred, tension crackled like dry timber. Tobias stepped beside her now, rifle in hand, his stance calm. "This doesn't have to end in blood," he called. Bradley's face was stone. "Then what do you propose?" Ayanna held up a scroll, weathered, torn, marked with ancient symbols. "This is your ledger," she said, "the record of what was taken, burned, and buried, passed from one generation to the next, and now to your son." A silence fell over the canyon. This wasn't a standoff, it was a reckoning. Lieutenant Bradley sat alone in the clearing, his wrists still bound, but no longer struggling. His eyes were locked on the faded scroll in his lap, the same one Ayanna had held before the cavalry just moments ago. Symbols he couldn't read lined the deerskin, but he understood what they meant. Each mark was a story, a name, a grave without a marker. Ayanna knelt across from him. Her hands were calm, her voice steady. "Your father called it pacification. We called it genocide." Lieutenant Bradley didn't argue. He couldn't. The weight in his chest was growing heavier with every passing breath. Ayanna reached into her pouch and pulled out a small object, a carved eagle feather wrapped in sinew. "This belonged to my grandfather. He was a storyteller, a keeper of names." She handed it to him. "Do you understand why we kept your life?" Bradley looked up, blinking. "No," he whispered. "Because we wanted you to carry the truth, not just as a soldier, but as a witness, a son." Tobias stepped into the circle now, quiet but resolute. "Truth doesn't undo blood," he said, "but it stops the bleeding." Bradley looked down at the feather, then back at Ayanna. "I never knew," he said. "I believed everything he told me, about the war, about the treaties, about who the enemy was." Ayanna gave a sad smile. "You still have a choice."
One your father never made. Just then, the cavalry stirred again. Colonel Bradley rode forward, slow and deliberate. His eyes locked on his son, then on Tobias and Ayanna. "What is this?" the colonel barked. "A tribunal?" Tobias raised his chin. "No, this is truth, finally seen, finally heard." Lieutenant Bradley stood, and for the first time he faced his father not as a soldier, but as a man bearing the weight of history. "No more lies, father." A wind moved through the trees, brushing the feathers of the old warrior's headdress Ayanna wore. The spirits were watching. Justice had found its voice. The dust had barely settled when the federal investigators arrived. 3 men in long coats, faces hardened by years of chasing ghosts across the frontier, stepped off their horses and walked into Whisper Rock Ranch, now silent, still, and scarred by what had transpired. Tobias greeted them with a firm nod. Ayanna stood beside him, scroll in hand. And Lieutenant Bradley waited in the center of the yard, pale but resolute. "I'm here to testify," he said, voice steady. The lead investigator, a gray-haired man named O'Malley, raised an eyebrow. "Against whom?" "My father," Bradley replied, "Colonel Nathaniel Bradley." He handed over the scroll. It took hours to explain it all. The hidden campaign, the desecration of sacred lands, the orders that were never recorded, never meant to be remembered. Tobias translated the tribal markings. Ayanna provided names, dates, and burial sites only the elders could have known. And Lieutenant Bradley, he didn't hold anything back. "I believed him," he confessed. "I thought I was defending peace, but I was protecting a lie." When he finished, O'Malley didn't speak right away. He simply turned to his men. Take it all down, every word. By sundown, formal charges were filed. Colonel Bradley was stripped of command and placed under arrest. His protest was loud, but no one listened, not this time. News of the testimony traveled fast.
By the next morning, orders came from Washington. All military forces were to withdraw from the sacred lands. Whisper Rock, the Gulch, and the surrounding hills would be recognized as neutral territory, protected by law and forbidden to any future military presence. Ayanna stood by the fire that night, holding the scroll to her chest. "They tried to erase us," she whispered, "but the land remembered, and now so will history." Tobias nodded. For the first time in 8 long years, justice had not only knocked, but stepped inside, sat down, and made itself known. The dawn light warmed the air as Tobias and Mary crested the final hill. Below, the dusty trail wound toward Denver's distant spires. Mary held her daughter close. The baby's soft breathing had become a steady rhythm of hope. Tobias walked beside them, hands empty. His rifle stayed secured on his back. He carried something far more precious now: trust. When they reached the trading post, Mary paused at the gate. She turned to Tobias, eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." He nodded, then smiled, a rare, genuine curve that felt like sunlight. "You belong with your family," he said. "Go to them. I'll make sure you find safe passage onward." Mary kissed her daughter's head. She lifted Tobias's hand and kissed it in return, as if sealing a promise. Then she turned and vanished into the bustle, mother and child stepping into a new life. Tobias watched until they were gone. The emptiness he'd carried for years pressed in again, and then it eased, like a breath released. He looked down at his feet, at the dust of the trail he used to walk alone. Then he felt the weight of something in his coat pocket. He pulled out a small, wrapped bundle and unwrapped it. It was a pistol, polished, over-under, passed down from his father. He remembered why he kept it. Protection, justice, vengeance.
He held it, feeling its cold steel, and then he handed it to the youngest Apache warrior who'd fought beside him. She looked up in surprise. Tobias dipped his head. "This is for you," he said softly. "Carry it when you need it, but only when you must protect what matters most." Her eyes widened. She accepted the weapon with a solemn nod, wrapping its grip in fresh leather. Tobias saw in her face the same spark he felt, that fierce purpose he'd thought lost. He turned away from the trading post. Before him lay an open road, stretching toward the Rockies. He felt neither fear nor regret, just a steady determination. He had started this journey as a man hiding from the world. Now he rode into it, knowing he was part of something larger, a connector between two worlds, a keeper of stories, a guardian of hope. As the sun climbed higher, Tobias Redmond walked forward. Each step a promise. He would stand for justice, for mercy, and for every soul who knocked on his door. And in that promise, he found himself once more. The first snowmelt trickled down to the valley floor. At its edge, the Apache women rebuilt their village, log by log, prayer by prayer. They stood in a circle around the spring that fed the land. Ayanna placed seeds from the ancient pouch into the water. Each one sank like a promise. Children gathered fallen branches and piled them into small structures. Elders sang soft songs of renewal, their voices carrying over the water. Tobias watched from the doorway of a new longhouse. He helped raise beams and thatch roofs, hammering nails alongside the youngest warriors. He still carried his rifle, but it leaned unused against a post. The girl who had memorized the scroll sat by the fire pit. She held a fresh hide and began to paint new symbols, stories of survival, of unity, of hope. Her brush moved with confidence, each stroke a bridge between past and future.
Mary passed bowls of stew to the workers. Her child crawled over soft grass, laughing in the sunshine.
She had found her place again. Ayanna approached Tobias, wiping clay from her hands. "We rebuild more than houses," she said. "We rebuild memory, identity, life." Tobias nodded. He felt warmth in his chest, a feeling he once believed was gone forever. A soft wind stirred, rustling new leaves and the youngest storyteller's painted canvas. It was the sound of history waking up, of communities rising from ashes. At dusk, the tribe gathered around the fire. They listened as the young keeper spoke the scroll's words for the first time. Voices joined in, a chorus that echoed through the canyon. Tobias sat among them, no longer an outsider. He had opened his door, and in return, opened his heart. The flames reflected in everyone's eyes. From one spark, a new life had caught fire, and the legacy of Whisper Rock would burn brightly, never fading, never forgotten. Years later, travelers still pause by the campfire at Whisper Rock Ranch. They gather close as the embers glow red against the night sky. An elder woman lifts her voice in Apache, retelling how 10 warriors and 1 lonely rancher faced an army. Her words drift through the trees, carried on the wind like a promise. She opened her door, she says, and in doing so, she opened hearts far beyond this canyon. Tobias Redmond's name has become legend, not as a gunslinger, but as a man who chose mercy over vengeance, connection over solitude. Around the fire, young and old lean in, hearing the flicker of hope in every crackle. They see in that story a mirror. In today's world, who will open their door? Who will stand when others flee? Who will protect truth and memory? Because the battles of the past still echo in our streets, our homes, our communities. Every day we face choices: to ignore injustice or to act, to stay silent or speak out, to close our doors or welcome the stranger.
That is the true spirit of true Wild West stories. Not just tales of rifles and outlaws, but of humanity's greatest weapons: compassion, courage, and the will to remember. If this story moved you, subscribe now for more true Wild West stories. Hit the bell so you never miss an ember of hope. And remember, in your world, you hold the spark. Be the one to open the door.